My mother left us for money, then came back, but was a stranger I couldn't trust. She vanished when I was just 14, chasing a better life across the ocean. Years later, she returned, but the mother I waited for was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. I was 14 when my mother left. It wasn't a sudden decision or a last-minute flight. It was a slow unraveling, a quiet goodbye wrapped in excuses and promises I couldn't believe. I remember the night she told me she was leaving for the United States, an illegal immigrant seeking a better life for us, or so she said. Our small home smelled of humidity and old wood, the walls thin enough to hear my siblings whispering through the night. That night, the air felt heavy, like something was breaking, though I didn't know what exactly. My mother sat at the kitchen table clutching a faded envelope, her hands shaking ever so slightly. The light from the bare bulb above flickered and cast long shadows across her tired face. "I have to do this," she said softly, avoiding my eyes. "I want to give you and your brother and sister a better life. We need the money." I nodded silently. What else could I say? My throat was tight, my heart pounding as if warning me to brace for what was coming. I wanted to scream, to hold her and beg her not to leave, but I was only a kid, and all I managed was a trembling whisper. "When will you come back?" I asked. She didn't answer. The next morning she was gone. The days that followed blurred into a fog of silence and sorrow. My grandmother and aunt stepped in their love, a fragile patchwork over the hole left in my chest. But no matter how much they tried, the absence of my mother was a void that swallowed whole any happiness I tried to grasp. I replayed her last words over and over. "I want to give you a better life." Was that really all that mattered to her money survival? At 16, I became desperately ill. The illness was cruel, twisting inside me with every breath. I remember lying on the hospital bed, weak and scared, reaching out for my mother's face in my mind. I called her phone every day, hoping to hear her voice. Each time she told me she couldn't come back, not because of fear, but because she said we wouldn't survive without the money she was sending. How could she say that? How could she leave me there vulnerable and sick to chase a dream she placed above her own children? My grandmother stayed by my side, wrinkled hands holding mine, whispering prayers in a language I barely understood. When she died in 2018, a part of me died too. But my mother still didn't come home. "I don't have the money," she said. It was the same excuse when my aunt passed away the next year. I felt abandoned in a way words cannot capture. Not just left behind, but forgotten. 7 years passed. When she finally returned, I was no longer the scared girl begging for her mother's love. I was 21, a young woman hardened by years of loneliness and betrayal. But even then, I wanted to believe there was a reason for her absence. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was broken too. The reunion was far from what I imagined. My mother didn't rush to hug us or fill the empty spaces of lost time. Instead, she seemed distant, detached. She spent more time with her old friends than with me or my siblings. The home we shared was crowded yet colder than ever. One day, I overheard her arguing with my aunt. Their voices were sharp, accusing. My aunt said she was neglecting us. My mother defended herself with the same tired excuse she was older now, needed to live for herself. I stood silently, the sting of their fight burning in my chest. I wondered if the mother who left us was really gone, or if she never existed at all. As I stared at her that day, I realized something painful. I didn't want the mother who left. I wanted the mother I had dreamed of, the one who could never come back. The journey to the United States wasn't just a change of place. It was the beginning of a new chapter, in a story I never imagined would unfold the way it did. My brother James and I left behind everything we knew in late 2019, chasing a fragile hope that we could finally rebuild the family that had been shattered so long ago. When we stepped off the plane, the cold American air hit me like a slap sharp, unfamiliar yet strangely liberating. It was the first time in 7 years I had set foot outside my home country, and the weight of everything I'd lost felt heavier than ever. But I was determined to make this work, to find my mother again. James was my rock throughout the journey. 3 years older than me, steady and protective, he kept his emotions guarded, but I could see the quiet pain in his eyes, the same pain I carried deep inside. We had both grown up without our mother, but somehow we still clung to the hope that once we were all together, things would be different. When we finally met her, it wasn't like the movies. No tearful embraces or joyful reunions. Mom was there, but she seemed like a stranger, almost a ghost of the woman I remembered. Her house was cluttered, crowded with piles of unopened mail, random trinkets, and bags full of things I couldn't understand why she kept. The smell of alcohol lingered faintly in the air, and the faint haze of cigarette smoke hung over everything. It was a far cry from the warm home I'd dreamed about. At first, I tried to focus on the positives. She cooked dinner for us, asked about our trip, and tried to make small talk. But the conversation always felt shallow, as if she was going through the motions without really being present. I caught glimpses of a side of her I hadn't seen before, frustration, fatigue, and something darker I couldn't quite place. Within weeks, the cracks started to show. She was late paying bills, missed appointments, and spent hours on the phone or at the casino down the street. The money she sent home for us for so many years, it seemed to vanish into thin air, swallowed by debts and addiction. One evening, James and I found her passed out on the couch, a bottle of cheap whiskey empty on the floor. The woman who once promised to give us a better life was now trapped in her own self-destruction. We wanted to help her, but every attempt was met with anger or denial. "Leave me alone," she snapped one night, eyes bloodshot and wild. "You think I want this? You think I'm happy?" It broke something inside me. I realized then that the mother we waited for had never really existed. Or maybe she was lost beneath layers of pain and addiction, too deep for us to reach. As weeks turned into months, her compulsive shopping and hoarding spiraled out of control. Our small home became cluttered with unnecessary things and the bills piled up. She refused to get help, refusing to admit that she had a problem. The debts weighed on all of us, but especially on me and James, who were now expected to shoulder the responsibility of caring for a woman who had abandoned us for so long. My uncle messaged me once, his voice a mixture of frustration and desperation. "You need to take care of her," he said. "She's your mother." But I was barely surviving myself. Between work, school, and trying to keep the household together, I felt like I was drowning. The guilt gnawed at me. How could I turn my back on her? But how could I carry her when she refused to be helped? Every night, I lay awake, torn between love and resentment, hope and despair. I wanted to believe that we could fix this family, but the more I tried, the more I felt myself breaking. Living with Mom had become a constant battle, a daily test of my patience, resilience, and heart. The house, once a place I hoped would be our sanctuary, now felt like a cage, lined with broken promises and creeping despair. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of glass, clinking, the faint whir of the washing machine, overloaded with clothes she never put away, and the unmistakable smell of alcohol lingering in the air like a dark cloud refusing to lift. It was as if the house itself was suffocating beneath the weight of her addictions, gambling, drinking, and hoarding that had embedded themselves into every corner of our lives. Mom's gambling was the most destructive. She'd leave in the middle of the night, slipping out with an empty purse, but returning with nothing but empty eyes and a bitter silence. The money she gambled away wasn't just hers, it was ours. The rent, the groceries, the bills we all needed to survive. The debts she racked up were like a shadow that followed us relentlessly, creeping into every conversation and every moment of peace. I remember one night the tension exploded like a powder keg. James and I had been trying for weeks to convince her to seek help, to face the demons she was running from. But she refused, retreating behind a wall of anger and denial. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" she shouted, her voice cracking with a mixture of frustration and pain. "You don't understand what it's like to be me." That night, I saw her break. Not the strong mother I once knew, but a woman trapped in her own self-destruction, haunted by regrets and fears she couldn't voice. James stepped in quietly, trying to calm her down, but even he seemed powerless. I felt my heart shatter as I watched my brother, usually so composed, wrestling with his own helplessness. As days passed, the hoarding grew worse. Our small home became cluttered with unopened packages, broken appliances, and mountains of clothes she refused to throw away. Every corner held a reminder of her struggles, a past she couldn't let go of, a future she seemed to fear. And then there was the alcohol. The bottle was always within reach, a crutch she leaned on to numb the pain she carried. I lost count of the times I found her, passed out, the faint smell of whiskey on her breath, mixing with tears I couldn't hide. Living like this was draining me. I was barely holding on, juggling a job, school, and the weight of caring for a mother who had become a stranger. One afternoon, after yet another argument about money, I sat alone in my room, feeling the crushing weight of it all. I was angry, hurt, and exhausted. I wanted to scream, to run away, But deep down, I still loved her. I still wanted to believe she could come back to us. But love wasn't enough. That's when my uncle's message popped up again on my phone. You need to take care of her. How was I supposed to take care of someone who refused to take care of herself? The words echoed in my mind, mocking me, reminding me of the impossible task I faced. I realized then that I was at a crossroads. I could keep trying to fix what might be broken beyond repair, or I could start protecting myself and my brother from the chaos. The guilt was unbearable, but so was the reality. The silence that followed my uncle's message was deafening. You need to take care of her. Those words haunted me, twisting and turning in my mind like a relentless storm. But how could I care for someone who seemed determined to destroy herself, who pushed us all away with each passing day? By now, James and I were barely hanging on. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on our shoulders, and every attempt to help Mom seemed to push her further into isolation. The hope we clung to was fading, replaced by exhaustion and a deepening sorrow I could hardly put into words. One evening, after a particularly brutal argument, Mom slammed the front door behind her and disappeared into the night. The clatter echoed through the house, and for a moment, James and I just stood there, stunned and helpless. Hours passed, then a day, then two. No calls, no messages. The silence was suffocating. When she finally returned, disheveled and smelling of alcohol, I felt something inside me snap. "Where have you been?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger and pain. She looked at me with tired eyes, the weight of years etched on her face. "Out," she whispered, avoiding my gaze, trying to clear my head. It wasn't the first time she vanished like that, but this time it felt different, more permanent. That night, James and I sat in the living room, the walls closing in around us. I could see the same fear in his eyes that I felt in my own heart. What if she never came back? What if this was the end of the family we tried so hard to keep together? But even as fear gripped me, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being, my own dreams for someone who refused to fight. The next morning, I found her holed up in her room, surrounded by the clutter she refused to part with. She was drinking again, the bottle almost empty. "Mom," I said softly, stepping inside. "We need help. We all do." She looked up, her eyes glassy and distant. "I don't need help," she said, voice barely audible. "I'm fine." That was the moment I realized that love alone wasn't enough. Sometimes love meant setting boundaries, protecting yourself from the people you cared about most. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd call, a local addiction counselor. "Hello, yes, I'm calling about my mother. She's struggling, and I don't know what else to do." As I spoke, a small flicker of hope sparked inside me. Maybe this was the first step toward healing. But I also knew the road ahead would be long and painful, filled with setbacks and heartbreaks. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between guilt and relief. Could I really let go? Could I truly put myself first? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. Things couldn't stay the same. Our family was breaking apart, and it was up to me to decide whether to fight for the pieces or walk away before I lost myself too. The days after I called the addiction counselor were some of the hardest I've ever faced. Mom barely acknowledged the call, acting like it was a minor inconvenience, rather than the lifeline I desperately hoped it would be. But James and I pushed forward, setting appointments, attending meetings ourselves, trying to understand the chaos that had swallowed her whole. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about us, about trying to salvage what little family we had left. One afternoon, I found Mom sitting on the floor of the cluttered living room, surrounded by unopened boxes and discarded bottles. She looked so small, so broken, like a child, lost in the wreckage of her own making. "Mom," I whispered, kneeling beside her, "we want to help, but you have to want it too." She looked up, tears glistening in her bloodshot eyes. "I don't know how," she admitted, voice shaking. "I don't know who I am without these things." That moment, her vulnerability pierced me deeper than any anger or frustration ever could. For the first time in years, I saw her not as the mother who left us, who gambled away our money, who drank to numb her pain, but as a person lost and scared. But healing wasn't going to be simple. Our uncle started calling more frequently, pressing us to take full responsibility for Mom. "She's your mother," he'd say, "you have to look after her." The pressure was suffocating. I wanted to scream to tell him that love wasn't a cure, that sometimes love meant knowing when to say no. But I kept my mouth shut, biting back the frustration. James and I tried setting boundaries, but Mom's resistance was fierce. Every effort we made was met with defiance, with anger, with desperate pleas for understanding. One night, after a particularly vicious argument, she threw a lamp across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass flying like broken promises. I stood frozen, heart pounding. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but all I felt was fear. Fear that this woman I loved was slipping away, that our family was crumbling beyond repair. Yet, even in the darkest moments, I held on to a fragile hope. Maybe the cracks in our family could be mended. But I was beginning to understand that healing wasn't a straight path. It was messy, painful, and filled with uncertainty. And sometimes the hardest thing to do was to keep loving when everything inside you wanted to let go. The months that followed felt like walking a tightrope in a storm. Some days, Mom seemed to grasp the tiniest thread of hope, a rare smile, a brief moment of clarity, and we clung to those like lifelines. Other days, she was lost again in the chaos of her addictions, the clutter piling higher, the debts mounting, the fights escalating. I learned that loving her meant holding space for both, the hope and the despair, the strength and the vulnerability. It was exhausting and heartbreaking, but slowly, painfully, I began to see her not as a broken person to fix, but as a human being struggling to find her way. James and I leaned on each other more than ever. Our bond, forged in shared pain and love, became the foundation of our fractured family. We sought therapy, both family and individual, to heal the scars left by years of abandonment and hardship. Sometimes it felt like crawling through fire, other times like emerging into sunlight. Mom started attending support groups, albeit reluctantly at first. Each step forward was hard-won, and every setback a heavy blow. But in those moments, I saw flickers of the woman I remembered, my mother, before the distance, before the pain. One afternoon, as we sat around the worn kitchen table, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Her words broke something open inside me. I realized that despite everything, the years lost, the anger, the sorrow, love, had been our constant thread. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding. It wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't erase the past, but it was a fragile new beginning. As I watched her slowly reclaim pieces of herself, I understood that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to keep hoping even when hope feels impossible. And so, with trembling hands but a hopeful heart, I chose to walk this path alongside her, uncertain of the future, but certain of one thing: we would face it together.